All right, let me know if you guys are good to go. Great. Ben Murphy, spokesperson for TransLink. Well, good morning everyone. Thank you for coming down. Today I'm going to outline some of the key elements of TransLink's Safe Operating Action Plan. Now, this is a plan that's going to comprise of initiatives we already have in place, and many of you would be familiar with those. It's also going to comprise of some new elements, and I'll talk you through some of those pieces very shortly. And it will have elements in the future that we will tweak and change as this pandemic continues. Importantly about the Safe Operating Action Plan, it is something that will evolve and change. It's not going to be a set in stone, so we'll take advice from health officials and experts to make sure that our response on transit is appropriate moving forward. There's really two categories. There's initiatives that we are doing and we are rolling out, and then there's recommendations that we're making to our customers as well in order to keep everyone on transit as safe as possible. First of all, to some of the initiatives we are doing and some of the changes that people are going to start to see around stations and indeed on Skytrain vehicles. Cleaning has been a really big emphasis for us right from the start, and we lifted our cleaning regiments across all modes a number of months ago now, and today we are taking that even further. Over coming weeks, people will start to see cleaning pit crews on board Skytrains and at key stations around the network. Now, these pit crews will comprise up to 4 cleaners, and they will swarm trains and vehicles using a hospital-grade disinfectant, wiping down high-touch surfaces, and that will occur during rush hours. Now, not only will this ensure that our trains and vehicles are being kept very clean, but of course it gives customers some visibility as well, because a lot of our cleaning measures are done overnight and out of hours. So we think it's important that we show people just how clean we are keeping the system. So those pit crews, which we'll do a quick demonstration of in a few moments, they will roll out from June 1. Now, in addition, on bus and SeaBus, we've been doing the spray disinfections. We're going to be doubling that schedule. Bus and SeaBus will now be having those spray treatments twice a week, and that comes in addition to their daily cleaning schedules, which do remain in place as well. On the topic of physical distancing, and this has been, of course, a real challenge for transit, because transit not typically designed for physical distancing. So we've been looking at and assessing ways that we could promote physical distancing on Skytrain in particular, and how we might go about doing that. One of the measures that we are going to be talking about today is that we're going to start to limit customer access to Skytrain platforms. Now, how does that work? What am I talking about? Essentially, when people arrive at stations, there's a set of fare gates which have to be tapped through. We're going to be changing the procedure at our busy stations so that typically only one fare gate will be set to entrance only, the other fare gates will be exit only. So that will limit the amount of people who will be able to tap through those Skytrain fare gates and reach the platform, therefore limiting the amount of people that are on Skytrains as well. At some of our busier stations, you might see 2 entrance-only fare gates, but typically it will be set to 1. It's going to start at our busier stations, and then we will look at a more wide distribution of that, and making sure that all goes well and people understand the process. And we've installed some decals, there's some behind me, and we'll be installing those just to make sure that if people do begin to queue outside of fare gates, that they are physically distant when they are queuing up to come through those fare gates. One important piece about this fare gate policy is right now, while ridership is fairly low, it's not going to change too much. This will really start to kick in once our ridership begins to return and we do have more people on the system again, and that's when you will start to see these queues forming behind Skytrain fare gates. So the idea of this essentially is we want to try and slow people coming onto platforms, and therefore slow the amount of people coming onto Skytrain cars as well. The third piece I want to sort of cover off with you all today is around face coverings, masks. I know there's been a lot of discussion, of course, in the past couple of days around the role face coverings will play. I want to be very clear about what our advice is to customers when it comes to face coverings. We are recommending that customers wear face coverings while on transit and while waiting for transit. So that is a slight change from our previous recommendation, which is we recommend wearing them when physical distancing is not possible. We're now saying we want to see people wearing face coverings and masks while on transit or while waiting for transit. And those can take various forms, of course. This is our T-branded face covering or mask. This is a prototype. We are looking at procuring more of these and potentially doing a wider rollout. This is my previous version. This is a old Rugby Sevens t-shirt that's cut up by my wife, so that works as well. So we're not suggesting people should be wearing, necessarily wearing medical grade masks. It is a face covering, and our view on that is that if we can have a large amount of people or most people on board SkyTrain and bus wearing face coverings, then that is going to be a safer experience for everyone. Because of course, physical distancing on transit is not always going to be possible. We can have issues, whether they be weather events or technical issues, and as I'm sure we've all seen, it takes a matter of minutes for a lot of people to amass at stations and on trains and buses, and so we want to be really upfront with customers in saying that distancing will not always be possible. So those are some of the key elements as part of our Safe Operating Action Plan. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Are you considering having someone at the station hand out masks if people don't have them?
We are looking at potentially some partnerships with groups to distribute masks. I think in the first instance we would hope that people would bring their own masks and face coverings, but we are considering some partnerships with different groups of people who may not otherwise have easy access to an appropriate face covering or mask. So those are initiatives we're looking at, but I don't have any specific update on that right now.
But will anybody be refused boarding or asked to wear a mask? If it's super busy on whether it's the 99B line or something like that, is the bus driver going to see anything?
With respect to face coverings and masks? No, at this stage it is a recommendation that we are making to our customers. One thing too is we're going to be putting up signage at stations, on vehicles around masks and face coverings and the benefits. I think what we want to do really is sort of grow this culture around wearing a face covering while on transit, and I think that's something that is going to develop over time. I was on a Skytrain just a few minutes ago, and I'd estimate probably half or so of people on board that particular train were wearing face coverings. So some work to do, but I think that amount seems to be growing naturally. And I think as we start to promote and really explain to people why we think face covering is a good idea, it's not so much about protecting you, it's about everyone on board. And if we had a train or a vehicle where everyone's wearing a face covering, that's going to be a much more safer experience for everyone. So I think for us it's more the carrot rather than the stick, trying to bring people along with us, explain our rationale and approach it that way for the moment.
In Montreal, they're doing hand sanitizer stations at the entrances to all of their metro stations. Is that something you guys would consider?
Yes, that is something we're considering. There actually are hand sanitizing stations already at some of our platforms, but we are looking at procuring more sanitizer to be able to do that. We did have a bit of a challenge early on with respect to procuring adequate supply of hand sanitizer. So some of those issues are being resolved, but yes, that's something we're going to be looking at more widely doing. Yeah, well at this stage we're not changing our policy with that respect, so trains, buses, the ventilation policies we're not adjusting. Obviously we'll monitor that moving forward and if any changes need to be made, but at this stage existing policies remain in place.
Does the transit police have had to intervene with people who tried to pack onto a train or bus that was too full?
Sorry Francis, do they have the power?
Transit police,
Yep.
did they have to intervene if people were getting too close to each other, or someone seemed to be deliberately getting too close to people?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd probably have to talk to transit police around exactly their procedures, but as I understand it, they of course assist when we have instances where we require crowd control or we need to be able to deploy them to assist in those situations where stations are getting busy. But in terms of their specific powers, they can't arrest people given no laws have been broken.
I'm not asking about powers. I'm asking if there have been incidents where people have been acting inappropriately, if they've had to intervene.
You'd have to ask Transit Police specifically. None that I'm aware of, though. I mean, keeping in mind ridership is fairly low on the system at the moment, so we're not seeing those heavy passenger loads that we did see pre-pandemic.
Why not change the policy around that, especially with the current how it is? Very strict regulations, you're outside, you have a chance to droplets land on you.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we'll continue to look at, but at this stage we're not adjusting that policy. So we'll continue to look at whether that would be beneficial. At this stage our view is we are going to be promoting the use of face coverings and masks as a good option to protect people and make the system safer when distancing isn't possible.
And what is the existing policy?
In terms of circulation and windows, well, on SkyTrain they remain closed, and on the bus system as well. So there's no adjustment to that policy.
In terms of ridership, have you seen it rebound at all this week with a few things open? And do you have any projections for how you expect it to return?
Good question. There has been anecdotally a very small increase in ridership that we've seen this week. It has not been a huge increase in ridership. Got the lawnmower going there now. It has not been a huge increase that we've seen in ridership so far. It's been a fairly modest increase. We do expect that it will be a fairly long process before we begin to see ridership return to levels which they were pre-pandemic. So we'd expect over coming weeks and months we'll start to see that ridership level gradually increase, and we'll continue to monitor that moving forward.
On buses, you guys have distancing measures in terms of blocking off seats. You're going to have front door boarding coming back. Where are you at in terms of barrier installation on buses, and are those seating restrictions going to stay the same, or are they going to loosen?
Yeah, in terms of the barriers, June 1st is the date where we will be reinstating fares on the bus system, and in line with that we will have the barriers set up, whether they be the plexiglass or the vinyl. So that installation has been going well, and we're still on track for that June 1st date. If you're out on the system, you will see that a lot of the buses already have those barriers installed. So that is still on track. We are still moving forward with that. In terms of the seating policy on buses, that will remain in place for now. We'll continue to look at that carefully. I mean, one consequence, of course, of the seating policy on buses is that you do tend to get people waiting for buses which can be full. So we have to really carefully watch ridership levels there, because it's a bit of a balance. We don't want to see a situation where we're going to have huge amounts of pass-ups or a lot of people waiting for very extended periods, many of which are essential workers. So for now that seating policy remains in place, and we'll carefully watch where ridership goes.
So what is the contingency plan? Say that ridership outstrips your expectations, there's a lot of people heading back to work if they have to or whatever. Is there a plan to try to keep those big crowds from growing, from getting buses and Skytrains being oversubscribed? I mean, is TransLink fairly flexible to needing to add more Skytrains, or what's the plan if those crowds do start growing? How quickly can we see a response to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you take SkyTrain, for example, by next week on Expo Millennium, we will be back to pre-pandemic levels of service. And at those levels, you're using every train. So there's no spares that we don't deploy. So in rush hours, that is, we have every train out on the line. So there's very limited manoeuvring that can be done in terms of adding service there. So we are being upfront with customers, Penny, and saying that distancing is not always going to be possible, especially when you have those challenging situations, whether they be weather events, technical events and so forth, that can have a domino effect on the system. So what I think our customers expect is that we're upfront and honest about what they can expect. And so that's the situation, and that's why this recommendation, which we'll be promoting fairly heavily around face coverings and masks, is so important.
What plans do you have in place for if there is actually large queuing happening, say, outside of commercial Broadway station with only a limited number of gates open?
Yeah, we can call for assistance if we see a very, very large amount of queuing which is occurring. The station attendants do have the option of opening the second fare gate as well. With this policy, it is something, it's almost a balance, because you don't want to be moving the problem. And what I mean by that is you don't want to move the problem off the SkyTrain onto platforms or outside of the station. So we need to make sure that the flow is balanced, and so that's why the station attendants will have some discretion to be able to open up a second fare gate if the situation occurs that outside of the station there's very large lines or it's becoming quite problematic. Keep in mind though that the lines or the queues will be moving reasonably quickly because it is just a case of people tapping through. So typically you'd get around 30 people per minute, one every 2 seconds or thereabouts.
Will attendants be on platforms as well, limiting the people going into cars or spacing people out, or do you have any control there?
Our station attendants will have a station attendant typically situated at the fare gates, monitoring that policy, and we will also have a station attendant typically on platforms. Now it does vary station to station because it depends how many station attendants we have. Not all stations are going to have this policy in place immediately in terms of the fare gates. We're starting with the larger stations where it's going to make more of an impact. But it's not the case that station attendants will be sort of managing customer loads on board the actual trains themselves. Anything else? No? Very good. All right, thank you all. We're going to do a couple of quick demonstrations just for the B-roll.